So let's go to Italy now for the latest. Our reporter Julia McFarlane is there in Genoa, and families are still clinging on to hope, hoping that they might find their loved ones somewhere in the rubble. Julia, thank you for joining us. And what can you tell us about the rescue and what the latest is?
Hey, Alona. Yeah, well, the top line at the moment is that the local prefecture here has raised the death toll up to 39 dead, at least 39 dead. Dozens have been injured. The rescue operation is still underway. I don't know if you can see just behind me, but there is a lot of heavy machinery going on. A lot of the heavy machinery is lifting up these huge bits of mangled concrete in the hope that people might still be rescued. There's a small number of people who are still missing, so a lot of people here in Genoa are hoping for some good news after this tragedy.
And have you been able to speak to any people who are survivors who actually lived through this horrific collapse?
I think there's a lot of people around who are sort of well-wishers and have been going past. There's been the main bridge opposite the highway that's collapsed is just chock-a-block full of journalists, and there have been lots of Genovans who've been walking past who are all sort of, wishing and praying and hoping for some good news as well. There are people still being treated in hospital who are seriously injured. Now, we're not allowed to, we weren't given access to the hospital. I think the people who are receiving treatment are critically injured, and so the priority is to give them the space and the recovery that they need. One thing that we learned in the last hour, though, is the mayor of Genova, he said that the houses now, the entire building has been evacuated. You can still see dozens of cars and trucks on either side of the bridge have just been abandoned and laid there since yesterday, since the accident. But also this area around us, just behind this fire truck, all of those houses have been evacuated, and today the mayor of Genova said that these houses, the people who've been evacuated from them, are possibly not even able to ever go home. They're thinking of possibly demolishing those houses because there's now talk of just getting rid of the whole bridge entirely, and how difficult that will be when all of these houses are in the area. So there is a lot of local anger about this, about how this bridge was allowed to stay in the condition that it was. A lot of questions being raised about why there weren't adequate checks. And the local media have been reporting that engineers 2 years ago raised the alarm over the structural integrity of the bridge. So yesterday, after the initial shock and horror of how huge the scale is, you can see just this huge part of this bridge that has collapsed. Today, that giving way to anger and frustration being directed at the authorities.
Wow, and understandable. That is a very dramatic image right behind you of that bridge just being cut off right there. But I understand the residents who want to know what happened. Are there any actual indications yet of what exactly went wrong?
So the Genovan Public Prosecutor's Office have now opened an investigation. They're looking into possible negligent homicide. Now, it's anyone's guess as to how long it will take for that investigation to reach a conclusion. But in the meantime, you can expect all sorts of finger pointing going on. Politicians have been laying the blame at various actors, whether it's the EU austerity cuts inflicted upon Italy or the Autostrada, the agency that's responsible for the highways. I think until this investigation is allowed to reach a conclusion, it's going to be very difficult for true responsibility to be taken for this tragic accident.
Well, understandably, a lot of people want answers. Julia, thank you for joining us today. And let's move on to Florida, where the students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School are going back to school. And it's the first day of school, but of course, this year in February, 17 people, students and people who worked at the school, lost their lives in a tragic mass shooting. So we have one of our reporters, Stephanie Wash, who's there in Florida. She has spent a lot of time with these students, with the community. And first, before we go to Stephanie, let's take a listen to what some of the students have said about what going back to school means for them.
I'm expecting to go back to school like every other year, but at the same time, you know that it's never going to be a normal again, I like to think of it as a new normal, but I wish we didn't have to experience this new normal. I wish it was just like every other year. I pick out my clothes, I have a good time, but this year I can't help but constantly think about not only myself and my friends at my school, but constantly thinking about my friends at other schools who don't have as many safety precautions as we now do, and I worry about them.
Stephanie, the first day of school is supposed to be a happy day. It's supposed to be a normal day for high school students. They shouldn't have to be thinking about this and dealing with all of this. As I said, you've spent so much time with these families in the aftermath since February. What does this milestone mean for them?
Well, today, as the students are returning to school, I mean, just behind me, the students are right here in school. They're about to be wrapping in just under 4 hours their first day of classes. A lot of the students that we've been talking to over the last 6 months have been dealing what we've described as this new normal, where there's new security, there's new threats that, they have to think about constantly. As Lauren Hogg described, who's actually one of the youngest members of March for Our Lives and who has spent her entire summer as a full-time activist on the road speaking to young voters, the last thing she wants to worry about is school safety here at Stoneman Douglas. She wants to worry about what she's going to wear to school today. But what she is facing is this new normal. She's worried about her friends who are at other schools that might not have the same safety measures in place as Stoneman Douglas. We also ran into Victoria Gonzalez this morning. Victoria is someone who we've spent a lot of time with over the last 6 months. She tragically lost her boyfriend, Joaquin Oliver, in that mass shooting. And Victoria is somebody who is obviously grappling with the loss of her boyfriend, but at the same time, it's what we described again, this new normal where she's returning to school. She went yesterday and picked up her school supplies. She's expecting that today is going to be as normal a day as any. Nothing special will be happening, which is what a lot of these students want. And I know the school district is trying to make these students feel, this is just a normal school year, as difficult as that may be.
And I guess the question for me is that even possible? As normal as they want to make this day, they're still going back to the same campus. The building where most of the people were shot last year is not being used. It's closed down. So are there just constant reminders of what happened for them?
Oh, they are everywhere here on this campus. So first of all, behind me, I don't know if you can see, but there is a freshman building down here. That freshman building still stands and is one of the survivors of the attack who was actually in the first classroom that was attacked. Brooke Harrison told me she's spoken to a lot of students who are a little weirded out that that building is still here on campus. But why that's happening is that there's a trial still going on. That is evidence for the state. So that will stay there and it will remain. And eventually they will be turning that freshman into a memorial for the 17 lives lost. Now there's also new security measures on here, which I touched upon lightly before. So what they'll be doing is they will be a mandatory school resource officer or armed school safety officer on every campus. They also will be having mandatory lockdown drills. I know here at Stoneman Douglas they will be having at least one drill monthly. And also, they had these measures in place where they had clear backpacks. That's been thrown out. What they're really focusing on now is the mental health of the students. And of course, another reminder is that there is still a looming trial in this community. The suspect is expected in court later today. So as hard as this community, I think, wants to continue on and go back to some sense of normalcy, there are these constant reminders.
Well, Stephanie, thanks for joining us and giving us the latest there. It's again, another tragic and heartbreaking reminder for the rest of us around the country of what students have to deal with going back to school. Now, the he said, she said, it just continues between the president and Omarosa. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, didn't really help the situation in a press briefing yesterday when she wouldn't give a direct answer as to whether or not there is tape of the president using the N-word.
Look, I haven't been in every single room. I can tell you the president has addressed this directly. He's addressed it directly to the American people, and I can tell you what the focus and the heart of the president is, and that's on helping all Americans. And certainly this is somebody who has been in business for decades, and you're just now hearing some of these outrageous accusations after the fact. He's dealt with people all over the world. It wasn't until he became a candidate for president that you started to hear some of these salacious and ridiculous claims.
Now, Janae Norman is joining us from the White House. Janae, we just played that clip there. It feels like it's a White House reality TV show with the he said, with the she said between Trump and Omarosa. But I feel like we're not getting to the root of the issue here, which is, are there implications for the president of the United States if there is indeed tape of him using this kind of racial slur, if we look at the positions of this White House and how people feel about it?
Right, and the question is, if he did say it, would it matter? And, the easy answer, maybe no, probably not. I mean, you have to think The president has made very derogatory statements before about women, about people with disabilities, about a war hero, Senator John McCain. Of course, this issue of whether or not he said the N-word, we would have to hear the recording or see the audio ourselves to know for sure. But on the issue of race, Sarah Sanders saying that these accusations are just now coming out. Accusations about Donald Trump being racist existed long before he was even a candidate, let alone president, and it didn't matter then. And his base has been unwavering in their support, even as he's made those other derogatory comments, sent those derogatory tweets as president. So would it matter? It seems to not have mattered much to this point.
Yeah, and not only for his supporters, but for Republican politicians who also have been supporting him throughout the administration, despite, of course, the Access Hollywood tape, despite the further conspiracy theories, all the things that you mentioned. I do want to talk about another big political story, though. Yesterday, there were primaries that happened in 4 states. And, from the results, it looks like we might be seeing a very different kind of makeup of our political leaders in this country.
Right. So last night's primaries showed progressive candidates prevailing in a way that is starkly different from Congress. Let's be honest. When you walk through the halls of the Capitol, most of the lawmakers you see are 2 things. They are white and they are male. But last night we were seeing something different, even in parts of the country like the Midwest. In Minnesota, State Representative Ilhan Omar won the Democratic primary. She was born in Somalia. She is Muslim. She's a refugee. She is a progressive. And she's poised to make history, becoming one of 2 Muslim women in Congress come November. In Vermont, Christine Hallquist became the first transgender gubernatorial candidate nominated by a political party. She is a progressive Democrat. If she upsets the incumbent governor in the general election, she'll become the country's first transgender governor in November. And then there's Jahana Hayes. She is a former National Teacher of the Year. She won the Democratic primary for Connecticut's 5th District. She's looking to become the state's first Black Democrat in Congress. And it's important to note that her victory comes on the heels of teacher revolts around the U.S., striking for better pay and increased funding. And now you've got a teacher, a former National Teacher of the Year, who could be in the position to help make decisions that would impact teachers, at least in that state. So very interesting results we saw in the primaries last night as we continue looking forward to the midterms in November.
Yeah, we'll keep following all that. Thanks for joining us. But like you said, change is coming to our political system, and I feel like that is just evident in the people who are starting to run for office. Now, let's move back to the Paul Manafort trial. We have been covering it throughout the entirety of the trial, but you have to think about what's going on here. One of the president's closest advisors could be heading to jail, and yet when it came to making their case, the defense ended up arresting that case. So right now we're going to go to Catherine Falders. She's in front of the courthouse there in Alexandria. Catherine, good morning. And like I said, 2 weeks of the prosecution calling over 20 witnesses, and then the defense just rests their case. Does that mean that there is no defense?
Yeah, a little bit of a surprising turn there. They called no witnesses and immediately rested their case, Lona. But the defense really here, and multiple legal experts I've spoken to say, this strategy isn't particularly unusual. Their defense is based on cross-examination of the prosecution's witnesses, especially the prosecution's star witness, Rick Gates, who the defense attacked on cross-examination. They branded him as a liar, as an embezzler, somebody who stole all of Manafort's money. So this strategy here, this defense strategy of calling no witnesses and presenting zero case, is not particularly unusual in cases like this.
I do wonder, and again, I'm not a legal expert, I will 100% admit that, but there are questions as to whether or not the president might pardon Paul Manafort if he were to be convicted. Do you think that at all plays into this?
Look, it's certainly possible that he could. Multiple sources that we've spoken to say these conversations haven't been happening. Alona, the defense team certainly isn't talking about that here. But look, the president has tweeted about Manafort. He's called the charges, quote, very unfair. But he's also tried to distance himself from Manafort, saying he worked with him for a short period of time, when in reality he really worked for him for 5 months. But look, the president loves the power of the pardon, as we've seen previously. So it's certainly something that could happen, but could be a little premature now.
All right, Catherine. Well, thanks for joining us. And of course, as the jury deliberations unfold, as the verdict comes in, we'll continue to follow this. And now let's move to New Mexico. A judge is getting death threats after he allowed bail for suspects, people who are suspected of holding children hostage and then training them how to use deadly weapons. So right now we're going to go to Gio Benitez. He's in New Mexico. And Gio, can you just recap some of what this story is about for us?
Yeah, Alona, you just mentioned those death threats, and that's why we're here at the courthouse, because it's really just such a big part of the story. In fact, this place actually had to be locked down. And the reason is because of the story behind this. We're talking about last week, police discovering that 11 kids were emaciated there at this remote compound in New Mexico. And you also had a 3-year-old little boy who was found dead. It turns out that little boy is the son of one of the suspects. And that suspect now is accused of kidnapping that boy from Georgia and bringing him to this remote compound. Now, the story of how that little boy died ties exactly back to what they're facing now, these accusations, and why people are so upset about this decision. Because prosecutors say that that little boy died during a religious ritual, and that they were trying to exorcise demons from that little boy, and that they were told, that other children were apparently told, that Jesus would be resurrected in that little boy, and that Jesus would then direct the kids to shoot at banks and schools. And so very disturbing details. And so when people were hearing this, they said, how can they possibly grant these suspects bail? And the judge said, you know what? The evidence just wasn't there to keep them, to show that they were a danger to this community.
That's the first question that came to my mind, too, is if they've raided the compound, if a little boy was found dead, how is it possible that the judge was able to release them on bail? I mean, does it also raise questions as to whether or not there's going to be enough evidence later on in the case?
Well, that's the question, Alona, because in court, these defense attorneys were saying, wait a minute, it's not illegal to teach a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old how to shoot a weapon. That is what the defense is arguing in court. And apparently, the state did not have enough evidence. They didn't bring enough evidence to the table to make this judge believe that they were a danger to this community. So, as you say, it really does raise questions about whether they'll have enough evidence if they take this to trial.
Wow. Well, we'll definitely be following that story. Gio, thanks for joining us. And now something dramatic, but with a happy ending. A couple who was rescued after being stuck in a cave for 2 days. We're going to Kana Whitworth, who's in Idaho Falls, Iowa.
Alona, Jessica and Spencer Christiansen live here in Idaho Falls, Idaho. They are extremely adventurous. They love the outdoors, and they're experienced climbers. But when they decided to celebrate Spencer's birthday by going to the Darby Ice Caves, they truly never thought that they would be in a fight for their lives. So they were prepared, they had done their research, they had their gear, but ultimately they got lost and became trapped inside the cave. These are the conditions in the cave. It's so cold that they both had frostbite, they were hypothermic. Their oranges in their packs froze solid, so they couldn't eat them. It's so dark that they couldn't see their hands in front of their faces, so they were using their headlamps, but conserving the battery whenever they could. It was an absolutely terrifying experience for the both of them, and when I sat down to talk with them, Jessica really put things in perspective, so take a listen to what she had to say.
I've been having a hard time the last few days, but you kind of shut everything out. You turn it all off because you don't have enough energy to panic when you're down there, and it kind of comes to you later, for sure. But it's really scary to think that you're leaving a child with no parents and no way out, and it's really cold, and it's pretty scary to face your death, for sure. And we knew we only had about an hour or two left before we would have died. So that was pretty scary. We risked everything, and we got really wet just to make sure we could find a way out. We tried it all. But it was the wrong way, and it was pretty disappointing. And the scary spot I got to was when Spencer was scared. I had total faith in him the whole time to get me out of there. But when I saw how scared he was and knew that it was probably the end for us, was the hardest part. So that's terrifying, to think that you're leaving your kid alone with no parents. I'm sorry.
The couple truly feared they would never see their 1-year-old daughter again. They say ultimately thinking about her is what pulled them through this whole ordeal. They said when they started to get tired, panicked, or freezing, they actually would take breaks to do workouts just to get their blood pumping. They were also soaking wet because the water, the ice cold water, was moving through the cave the entire time. One of the things that kept them alive was a filtration straw that they used to drink water. They also decided to burn one of their packs to try and stay warm. These are the things that kept them moving. Jessica's mom alerted authorities when the couple didn't return, so they rescued them. As they say, they were on the brink of death. It happened just in time. Rescuers say they get at minimum 10 calls a year to go into that cave, so they have trained for something like that extensively, which helped them get the couple out alive. So truly a life-changing experience for them. Although, Alone, I have to tell you, they told me they would actually consider going back and doing it again now that they know how to maneuver through that cave. It's amazing.
That sounds like a harrowing experience. I can't believe that they'd be willing to go back. All right, we want to lighten it up here at the end for you guys. So we have a little story that just makes you love the internet and kids. I don't know if you've seen pictures of a little 6-year-old girl. Her name is Caitlin. Now, does that look like the face of an angel to you? Well, Caitlin is not an angel. See right there? She looks like she might know that she did something wrong. She went on her mom's Amazon account, and while she said that she was just checking to see if her Barbie was coming in the mail and what the shipment dates were, she actually ordered $350 worth of toys. And that was the picture of her when all of the packages arrived. So I think you can imagine her mom's surprise. Take a look at what she said.
I came home and the truck pulls up and all these boxes are getting pulled out of the truck.
I love Amazon.
I'm sure Amazon loves Caitlin right now too, but Caitlin did end up getting not grounded, but kicked off the internet for a month. Mom said no internet. The good thing is they didn't send all these toys back. They've actually donated them, so they will go to someone else. That's it for our show today. I'm Alona Minkowski. Thank you for watching ABC News Live, and don't forget that you can watch us on abcnews.com or you can download the ABC News app.